Braised kale is one of those more northern German traditional winter dishes that are so easy to make. They're so delicious and such a staple, and I hope that they're going to become a regular on your dinner table. And I'm so happy to share the recipe with you today. Over here I already have my ingredients. Of course, we need a lot of kale. Actually, my mom tells me how when she was a child in their family of 5, my grandmother would have an entire bathtub full of kale. However, we're not going to use that much. Then I have some bouillon. I have some, this is actually lard. You can use tallow or you can use any other cooking fat. I have an onion. I have some rolled oats, some mustard. I already talked about the bouillon, and salt and pepper. The first thing we will do is cut up the onion into dice. I always like to sharpen my knife before I start cutting an onion, and the knife should be so sharp that it feels like you're cutting an apple rather than an onion. Over here I have my pot. While I'm letting this heat up, I want to talk about the kale really quick. Traditionally, what people do in Germany is they buy kale that comes in these long leaves, I guess, with the stem in the middle. And what happens in the winter is that the ground will freeze over, and most of the time that you buy kale in Germany, it has already experienced some frost. To my understanding, what that does is it converts the starches into sugar, and it makes the kale less bitter and a little bit more sweet. I have tried to replicate that because where we live in California, we don't get kale that has experienced some frost and has been frozen. So I just actually, to make it a little easier for myself, I often buy these packages of pre-shredded kale and I put them in the freezer overnight. It's not exactly the same because they're off from the roots and not in the ground anymore, so they're already picked, but it simulates that pretty well. Also, it does another thing, because you are using so much kale, it can be a little bit challenging fitting it all in, and then you have to wait until it wilts and it kind of sinks in before you can add more kale. And when you freeze it, it kind of pre-wilts it a little bit and makes it a little bit easier to manage. The biggest downside of this type of pre-shredded kale is that often you have these little pieces of stems here. So what you might see me doing is, while I'm cooking this, picking out these bigger chunks from the stem, these harder pieces that I don't want to have in the final dish. I'm adding a good bit of my cooking fat. This is a lard. Tallow would be fabulous too. Because this is already pretty hot, I'm adding my diced onion. I'll saute that until the onion is translucent. And I always love the smell of sautéing onions. This might take a few minutes before they're really nice and translucent. And now I'm ready to add my kale. For 4 people, I'm figuring about 2 pounds or so of kale easily. And we'll just add that. As I'm adding it, I'm going to be looking for wilted pieces that aren't so nice and bigger pieces of stem that I'd like to take out. pieces either go really well into your compost, or I actually like to steam them up and feed them to our dog. She loves it. Now all I'm doing is, while I'm sauteing the kale, I'm just gonna gradually add more until it all kind of shrinks and falls in. I've added all the kale to this pot, and you can see how much it has already fallen in and shrunken. It's pretty amazing. Every single time I do this, I'm amazed at how much you begin with and how little in volume you end up with. And to get this cooking, I'm adding some water, a little bit of mustard, adding one of these cubes of bouillon. You can always do that to taste. We'll mix that in down here so that it dissolves. Some pepper, a little bit of salt, and all I need to do at this point is just put a lid on and turn this to low. So we'll let this simmer, and every so often you want to go in and then stir it so that it doesn't get burnt on the bottom. And when this is done, we'll come back and look at it. After about 10 minutes or so of cooking, I am adding maybe a tablespoon or two of the rolled oats and stir it up, and then keep on occasionally stirring it every so often. So let's have a look at what the braised kale looks like. Ooh, it looks exactly the way I'm expecting it to look. Almost, well, not quite mushy, but very sunken in and very soft. And you're probably wondering how to serve this. Of course, you can do whatever you want. You can eat it however you want. However, one of the more traditional ways is to eat it with some particular meat. There is a type of meat that is a little bit more challenging, if not impossible, to get in the United States. So what I always like to do is use a Polish smoked kielbasa. It's a fairly salty sausage. And what you want to do is you want to add this to the kale. And while you don't want to cook it, you want to just heat it up in the kale, which is what we're going to do now. In terms of serving up, I have already gone ahead and boiled some potatoes. Basically add braised cabbage to a plate. And here's your finished plate. I always like to eat it with a lot of medium or Dijon mustard on the side, and it's such a warming, delicious dish. Here it is. I can't wait to actually eat it, as they say, dig into it. And if you're looking for more traditional German recipes, I have an entire playlist right here that I invite you to watch. Thank you for cooking with me in my kitchen, and I'll see you in those next videos.